Please join me in welcoming Dr. Temple Grandin.
It's really good to be here today. I'm supposed to press this button and my slides come on. Yep, they worked. That's good. One of the things can't emphasize enough with young autistic children is early educational intervention. That's just absolutely super important. I was 60 just this summer, and by the time I was 2.5 years old, was in a very good program. Mother took me into the Children's Hospital in Boston, and a doctor named Bronson Crothers referred her to two speech therapists that worked out of their home. And they were just those older, experienced teachers that knew how to work with kids. And then my mother hired a nanny who spent hours and hours and hours doing turn-taking games with me and my sister. We've got to be teaching these kids turn-taking. See, one of the things about being a child of the 50s is it turned everything you did with another kid that was fun involved turn-taking. Turn-taking is really important. We've got to teach that really, really early. There's a teacher kind of grabbing the kid's chin. My teacher did that with me. She said, now come on, now just pay attention. Some autistic kids, you can kind of pull them out of it. But there's others where if you do this, you're going to drive them into sensory overload. And one of the biggest, most neglected areas is the sensory problems. When a loud school bell went off, it hurt my ears. This is a picture that a young man sent to me. It's actually from a book called Little Rain Man. It's a young autistic boy drew this and showing how loud sounds hurt his ears. Now the thing is these sensory problems are very variable. One kid might like the sound of running water. Another kid's going to want to get away from the sound of running water. Now high-pitched intermittent sounds, things like smoke alarms, those tend to be the worst things. But these are really real problems. You know, if you have a child and you take him into the big supermarket or a Walmart or someplace like that, and he just has a meltdown and starts screaming, that is sensory overload. So you kind of want to figure out, you know, if your child's got a lot of sensory problems, well, what happens at Walmart or the big supermarkets or the shopping mall? And if every one of those trips is screaming fit, you've got really big sensory problems. Because some kids can see the fluorescent lights flicker on and off like being in a discotheque. It just drives them crazy. Or they go down the detergent aisle and they just want to gag because it's just too much smells, too much just overwhelming stimulation. Now the thing is, one of the things they wanted to test me for is to make sure that I wasn't deaf. So I got a hearing test and I wasn't deaf. But the problem is, auditory threshold tells you nothing about auditory detail. Auditory detail is the ability to hear hard consonant sounds. Like if I said cat, or was it rat, or bat, you know, differentiating between cat, rat, and bat. And my speech teacher would enunciate those sounds. She'd hold up a cup and say, cup-pa. In fact, she used a lot of kind of ABA type of things. And the thing that's most important, that I'm going to be adamant about, is the real little kids, the 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, they need 20 hours of one-to-one with a really great teacher. You know, and who that good teacher is. That's the most important thing. Now, this is work done by Ami Klin, and he had people on Asperger's and people with high-functioning autism watch Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Well, I have to say that's a boring social movie that I wouldn't be that interested in. I don't even think I could keep the headphones on the plane, you know, for this one. And look at how many times a normal person looks at the eyes. I didn't even know that people had all these secret eye signals until I read a book about it when I was 50 years old. But the other thing is, most people explain this picture just from a social standpoint. There's also a big problem with attention shifting. Look at how many times the normal person looks back and forth. How quickly they can shift attention back and forth compared to the red line, which is the autistic person. And the autistic person's looking at the mouth because you've got to remember they do not hear auditory detail very well. Some of these kids are like a really bad cell phone connection. And when they get tired, it's going to get worse. You know how when you get on the phone, you're going, oh, it's breaking up, it's breaking up. Well, that's the way some of these kids' hearing is. You know, it's like, and it's going to vary as to how much of the signal gets through. One of the places where there needs to be a lot of research done is in the sensory problems. I'm kind of, really, to be perfectly honest, sick of all the theory of mind research. Because these sensory problems can be so debilitating. How can you socialize if you can't even stand being in a restaurant? You can't stand being at a sporting event or other places, a noisy restaurant, places like that. Now, some people have visual problems. I didn't have them. You know, where the image will break up like a mosaic. Donna Williams describes this in some of her books. And oftentimes people that have these problems, they'll have problems with depth perception. Okay, how can you tell if a kid's got visual processing problems? Obviously, if he's got sound sensitivity, he's going to cover his ears. They do a lot of flicking around the eyes. That's a tip-off. They'll tend to tilt their head because they can see better if they look out the corner of their eye. Oftentimes, they hate escalators because they can't tell when to get on and off the escalator. Fluorescent lights can be a big problem. In fact, when you look at things we may have to make accommodations for in college, getting away from fluorescent lights is probably big number one. Problems with catching a ball, and you go in and you do eye exams, and they're going to be normal. The problems inside the brain. Don't get hung up on diagnostic categories. These diagnostic categories are not precise. They're labels. It's like profiling a hijacker. It's only sort of accurate. And I'm saying this really, really seriously. It's not accurate like tuberculosis is accurate. I mean, what other kinds of syndromes do people sit around in a hotel room and decide how to diagnose it? I mean, that's the same way building codes are figured out. And, you know, engineers sit around hotel conference rooms and decide, you know, how to change the building code. I mean, I've done that with animal welfare codes. Now, the thing is, if the profile's used correctly, there's a high correlation with brain scan data. But I find once you get out away from the big medical centers, profiles are not used correctly. Okay, what's the difference between Asperger and autism? Well, right now, until they change it, it's real simple. Autism has to be onset before age 3. There's obvious speech delay along with the other autistic symptoms. Asperger's, there's no obvious speech delay. So to put it very, very simply, when the kid's 3, nobody's running off to the doctor. So what's PDD? It's early onset, but not quite enough symptoms to call it autism. Now, a lot of these sensory problems I've been talking about, dyslexics can have them, ADHD can have them, lots and lots and lots of the different labels can have them. And I can tell you, I can't wait until they can get high-speed brain scanning, and that can be used to diagnose the brain systems where we have problems. Now, some kids, when they go to read, some autistic kids, not everybody. These sensory things are very, very variable. I didn't have these visual problems. They go to read white paper with black print on it, and the writing will kind of jiggle on the page because there's problems with the circuits that process motion in the brain, and they're seeing motion when they shouldn't be seeing motion. Okay, here are some simple things you can do for visual processing problems. Things you can do yourself. Why don't you get an incandescent lamp with an old-fashioned energy waster bulb, put it next to the kid's desk. Those twirly kind of fluorescent light bulbs, some of those are terrible. I normally do not see flicker on fluorescent lights, but I stayed at a hotel where I saw flicker on a lamp that had those kind of bulbs, and I could not read with it. Block fluorescent lights with a hat, sit over by the window. Now, a laptop computer is the only computer that absolutely doesn't flicker. I know a lot of people where a laptop just saved them. The TVs flicker, the TV types flicker, and the big desktop panels, a lot of those flicker because there's a fluorescent light inside it. Only screen that doesn't flicker is a real skinny one, where it's so skinny, like on a laptop, you can't get a fluorescent light in there. Try printing the work on gray, tan, or pastel paper to reduce contrast. Some people are really helped with the Irlen-colored lenses, where you try on different colored glasses till you find the shade where it works. Okay, I get out in the low-income areas. I go, okay, people, let's just go down to Walmart, and we're going to try on all of the pale-colored sunglasses. And I talked to one mom, and her kid couldn't tolerate, her 10-year-old couldn't tolerate 5 minutes of Walmart. And they tried on some little pink children's glasses, and she can do an hour of shopping now that she was not able to do before. Balancing games, you know, a lot of the OT things, a lot of the things the OTs do with pressure and swinging and balancing, like sitting on a ball, sometimes help to stabilize processing. They make that bad cell phone connection work better. It's like taking that phone over by there, get it right up against the window. Maybe it'll work in this building. And then some people can be helped with prism glasses, but those have to be done by a professional. But the other things on here are just simple things you can try. I had a dyslexic student that would have flunked out of school without Irwin lenses and a laptop computer. Now the problem we've got is autism is very, very variable. So if you've got 20 people with autism, Irwin lenses may only work on 2 of them. But they really work on those 2. They're not going to do anything for me. I don't need them. Scientists have learned a lot about the brain. I get really fed up when people say, well, they don't know anything about it. That's a lot of rubbish. Actually, scientists know a whole lot about the brain. It's a very strong genetic basis in autism. The emotion circuits are abnormal and immaturely developed. One of the big things about the autistic brain is there's problems with the interconnectedness between different brain departments. I like to visualize the brain as this great big corporate office tower. And up at the top, you got the chief executive officer. And then you got the math department, and you got the advertising department with the graphic designers. You've got the sales department, all the different departments, operations. And in the normal building, you got all kinds of internet and email connections and phone connections that wire together all the different departments. Now, in autism, what happens is a chief executive officer, we just give him one dial-up. That's all he gets. But then maybe over in the graphic design department, they get 100 internet connections. In other words, some departments get extra wiring. Human resources, the social stuff, sales, we don't even give them phones. Because we're more interested in wiring up the geek stuff, like the math department and the things like that. Now the brain, let me tell you an interesting thing about the brain. You have gray matter and you have white matter. Gray matter is the brain's processors. White matter is the interconnections between the offices of the different departments of the brain. Half of the brain is white matter. Half of the brain is interconnecting circuits. Another interesting thing that's been learned by Dr. Casanova, the University of Knoxville, is he looked at these things called mini-columns. They're the brain's primary processor units. And he found that people on the spectrum have more processors per square inch. But there's a price you pay for that. Those little teeny processors aren't powerful enough to send out big trunk lines out the different departments of the brain. We leave the CEO without very much wiring, from the frontal cortex. And normal people have larger circuits with big trunk lines. So there's kind of 2 ways you can make a brain. You can make it really social, leaves out the detail, a lot of fast connections, or make it really go for detail, but going to be poor on the long-distance connections, but the local connections. Sort of imagine the office building where down in the math department we got cables this big over the cubicle walls, and the cubicle walls are falling down because they got gigantic cables hooking up all these computers they brought in. That's that would be the savant brain. Now, these are behavior problems that are caused by the autism or the Asperger's. These are mainly sensory things, screaming when the fire alarm goes off, tantrums in a supermarket. I couldn't tolerate scratchy clothes. There's no way you're getting wool against my skin. I just can't tolerate it. Some kids have poor handwriting. There's a good reason why keyboards were invented, and I'm a big believer in introducing them early. And then the problem with fluorescent lights. These are things we're going to have to accommodate. This is the stuff we do not have to accommodate. And I think we're getting into kind of a generational difference here. Because let me tell you, table manners, pound it in. Saying please and thank you, pound it in. Shaking hands with people, pound it in. Yes, you do have to sit through church. If you don't like it, you got to sit through it. I wasn't allowed to stim at the table. I was allowed to stim during rest period after lunch. I was given sometimes I could stim, but church and dinner were 2 places where it wasn't allowed. And I think this sort of, more strict upbringing I had was really helpful. Because I see people all the time, 40, 50, 60-year-old Asperger's all over the place, kept good jobs for years and years and years. And I think that more rigid upbringing was really helpful. There was absolute consistent discipline between home and school. There was no way I could play the teacher against mom, and vice versa. If I had a bad day at school, they took away Howdy Doody show for one night. Sloppiness. I've seen autistic kids now, and Asperger kids that go in a store and take stuff off the shelf and throw it on the floor. Well, I wasn't allowed to do that. I was taught when I was 5 years old, you don't touch it in a store unless you're going to buy it. Making rude comments about people's appearance. This is, no, this stuff's not all right. And having autism or Asperger's is not an excuse for this. But you've got to differentiate between the sensory problems, because you can't, sometimes a kid's going to have a meltdown when they get tired. They just can't stand it, especially when they get overstimulated. And they've got to differentiate rudeness from getting overstimulated. You don't ever, ever punish sensory problems, ever. Now, some kids, little, you'll find to be good at something like drawing. One of the things I want to emphasize is building on the area of strength. Kids that are on the spectrum are often good at one thing and bad at something else. We've got to build on the area of strength. What is this person good at? It's really, really important. Unfortunately, in special ed, there's too much emphasis on the deficits and not enough emphasis on building on the strength area. Also, the kids will get fixated on something. If the kid likes airplanes, read books with airplanes, do math with airplanes. I've had people say, well, all he wants to do is play Pokemon. Well, if he's good at drawing, I want him to draw pictures of Pokemon. Okay, now we're going to do Pokemon's car, Pokemon's house. In other words, broaden it out, broaden it out. Even somebody that's nonverbal is going to have some areas of strength. We've got to build on those areas of strength. Now, I'm a visual thinker. Everything I think about, it's like Google for images. Language narrates the pictures in my mind. I think about something, it comes up like pictures. Photorealistic pictures, that's how I think. And those are 16mm movie reels in my head. They don't have those anymore. Now, when I design equipment, I can actually test run it in my head. I didn't even know that was a special skill. I thought everybody could test run equipment in their head. I didn't know it was a special skill until I started interviewing people about how they think. I didn't even know that most people thought in words. Now, one of the things that's been very interesting, that's been found out, is the autistic brain is into details. And the normal brain tends to drop out details and get overly vague. It's a continuum. Now, you want your air traffic controller to be a little bit obsessive, because you'd like to not have the planes smash into each other. You'd like to have your bridge engineer not forget about the details, because otherwise the bridge is going to fall down. That's simple. This is one of my projects that was built down in Brazil. And I like this one because I like to fantasize about what the archaeologists are going to think this is for when they dig it up. And obviously, of course, it had great, great religious significance. Now, how do you form a concept when you think in pictures? You form a concept by sorting pictures into categories. Making categories is the beginning of concept formation. And this little boy sent me another picture showing how he's sorting cats and dogs into different boxes, in order to differentiate a cat from a dog. Well, a dog is bigger than a cat. Okay, that's one way you can do it. But then when you get a little tiny dog into the neighborhood, I can no longer sort them by size. And when our next door neighbors bought a dachshund, I had to figure out why she wasn't a cat. And I looked at her, and I looked at her, and I looked at her. And I had to find a visual feature every single dog has that none of the cats have got. And every single dog, no matter how weird, has got exactly the same nose. In other words, I found a visual feature where you could categorize all of the dogs. It's sensory-based categorization. It's not word-based. You could also do it by sound, barking or meowing. That is sound-based. Now, I used to joke around about maybe having a big internet connection deep into the visual cortex, and Dr. Nancy Minshew did a brain scan, a special kind of brain scan on me, and found that my big trunk line down the base of the brain. In all brains, there's a big, huge trunk line that's down in here where all of the processor units tie into that, going from the front to the back of the brain, and deep into the visual cortex. And when I got a copy of these pictures, I'm like, oh, wow. Well, that begins to explain it. You know, mine's a whole lot bigger. And there I've got a great big one on the right side, but I pay a price for this. Man, I could not do algebra. It's too abstract. There's nothing there for me to visualize. And I'm finding a lot of kids where they need to go straight to geometry and trig. They can do geometry and trig. I never had a chance to really do geometry and trig because of failed algebra, so they kept pounding away on algebra. I had a fantastic science teacher who took my fixations and used them to motivate me in science. Because when I was in high school, it was terrible. Tease, worst part of my life. It was absolutely, beyond totally dreadful. But I now had a goal, becoming a scientist. So I stopped goofing around in school. But I just couldn't do algebra. It was just totally impossible. Now I have found that since what happens in autism and Asperger's, and Eric Courchain has done research on this here in California, and Dr. Courchain has found that there's abnormalities in these interconnector circuits. There's not enough of them to go around. So what tends to happen, one part of the brain gets wired, maybe extra, other part of the brain gets left out. And I kind of found that there's kind of three specialized types. Now you can have mixtures of these. The visual thinker like me, photorealistic pictures, bad at algebra. Music and math minds. This is a type of visual thinking, but it's more abstract. It's pattern thinking. It's pattern thinking. In my book, Thinking in Pictures, I explain visual thinking, but in another book called Born on a Blue Day, Daniel Tammett's going to do a very nice job describing to you the world of pattern thinking. Then another type, it's a word thinker. They know lots and lots of facts. Oftentimes they love history. They might make good journalists, and they're terrible at drawing. They're absolutely not a visual thinker. Oh, I pressed the wrong thing there. Now, I want to try to give you a glimpse into the mind of the pattern thinker. On these slides, a lot of them deliberately do not have writing. I'm trying to get you away from language. I've got to get you into an alternate reality here. That praying mantis, that's the work of Robert Lang, is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. That praying mantis, you see on that slide. Now you see the pattern that's in the background there. That is the folding pattern for making the praying mantis. Now I can tell you, there's no way I could possibly do this. Absolutely no way. It's another kind of mind. And these guys tend to have trouble with reading in English. That tends to be their weak area. How do you teach a concept? You teach a concept like not running across the street. I mean, I've had parents say, well, my kid obeys the rule at home, but at school he runs across the street. At the Joneses he runs across the street. What you got to do is you got to teach him in many, many different streets. Many, many different streets go into the not running across the street category. Then you'll start to get a concept. That's the same way you teach a guide dog or a seeing eye dog about intersections. You must show him many kinds of intersections. Because if you only show him intersections with white lines, he won't know what to do if there's no white lines. Or let's say you only showed him intersections with stoplights. He isn't going to know what to do with intersections that have stop signs. You see, it's different pictures. It's very specific. The normal human being drops out the details. Play games with categories. Dr. Nancy Minshew found that you could lay out some objects and you could say to an autistic kid, pick out the red things, and he could do that. But if you ask him to pick out new categories for these things I'm showing on the screen, like maybe make up new categories. Round objects, contains plastic, contains cloth, is an article of clothing, things that have metal in them. Play games with categories. It helps to teach flexibility of thinking. One of the problems in autistic thinking is it's very rigid. And when we were kids, we played lots and lots of that game, 20 questions. How many people here know what 20 questions is? Okay, really good game because it's teaching categories. That red ball there is red. It's also round. It could be used, if I said pick out objects here for recreation, okay, the ball, the hats, but it might depend upon who's using the hats and where, because that ball can also be used for hand therapy. It's the same kind of ball that's used for hand therapy. Okay, when I was 3 and 4 years old, we didn't have IEPs or anything like that when I was a child, but we had an education plan for my summer on this little camp. I was going to learn the Lord's Prayer, and I was going to learn to do my very, very, very best. And I learned the Lord's Prayer, and I had absolutely no idea what it meant. And the only thing that meant anything to me was the power and the glory. And I pictured a rainbow with an electric tower in the base of the rainbow. That is the power and the glory. And you might be interested to know that this picture here is no Photoshop tricks or anything. I actually took that. It's a real picture. No tricks. Now, some people say autistic learning is just memorization and scripting. In the beginning, it's just memorization and scripting. But as I learn more and more and more and more things, my search engine, my mind works just like Google for images. So as I load more and more data in here, my search engine can put it around and categorize it in different ways. And then you get less sort of robotic and less sort of scripted, because I can put it together into new categories. I think it's important for autistic kids to see a lot of things. When I was 15 years old, the opportunity came up to go to my aunt's ranch. I was scared to go. The mother made me go. That was good. You don't shove kids into surprises. Surprises cause panic. But some of these kids need to be pushed a bit. Try new things. And that was the best thing that ever happened. Okay, if you're a visual thinker, you ought to be good at this. See this figure right here? How many of you see it in the pink and yellow figure? How many can see it? Oh, doing kind of badly. Well, I don't have the computer up here to demonstrate it. You'll just kick yourself. Now, when you take somebody that's a really good visual thinker and you put them in a brain scanner, just the vision part of the brain gets turned on and other stuff's turned off. So now I'm going to show you how I can use visual thinking in a more abstract way. And this is a visual symbol picture for the brain scan of the autistic person. It's like this little bright cabin in the wilderness, and then it's all snow and you don't have all those other interconnections. The brain scan of the normal person is like this lamp store. You see, you got so much other stuff here turned on, it actually covers up the visual thinking. In fact, there's research that's been done now in the brain that shows that language covers up visual thinking, musical thinking, the more detailed sensory-based thinking. Well, what's that all about? Well, I know this is a stretch, but that can remind me to talk about interconnectedness of brain systems. I know that's a stretch, a skeletal building, but I'm trying to give you an insight into how I can do some abstract thinking by using these visual symbol pictures. But you see, I always have to go back to an image, or I cannot think. In fact, remembering numbers, I'm really terrible about that. Absolutely terrible. I only have memorized like about 7 or 8 phone numbers. Thing is, when you hear a word, see a word, speak a word, or think about a word, see how different parts of the brain turn on? The normal brain has all kinds of interconnections. Well, in autism, some parts get extra wiring, some get none, but the tendency is for the frontal cortex, the brain's chief executive officer, that tends to just get a few dial-ups if it's lucky. That's all it gets. Now, this is a piece of art that came from an Alzheimer's patient that had no previous interest in art. It's called frontal temporal lobe dementia. And the frontal temporal lobe dementia ate out the language parts of the brain, and then art talent showed up, or music talent showed up. And then 4 or 5 years later, the Alzheimer's wrecked everything. But there was this period where the language was ruined, and this art talent showed up. And this is Bruce Miller's work, published in the journal Neurology. This is a scientific journal this was published in. There's another piece of the art from one of these people. One of them was a tape deck installer, car stereo installer. For the visual thinker, you got to make teaching math concrete. If you're working with some of the nonverbal kids, work with blocks that are different lengths for different numbers so they can feel the numbers, see them. Cut up a piece of fruit. That teaches fractions, half an apple, quarter of an apple. Or if that's too messy, then cut up cardboard circles. You know, here are just little things you can manipulate, like, 4 plus 5 equals 9, and there's little things that I can handle, little pieces I can handle and touch. So numbers are real. You can use pennies. Pennies work really, really well. Don't use nickels or dimes. That will be confusing. Use pennies because they're a unit of 1. I think this is clever. This is from the TEACH program. We got 5 minus 1 equals 4. And when you take a piece away, you bag it in a baggie because you took it away. That makes subtraction concrete. I thought that was clever. Here is 6 minus 5 equals 1. And you got 5 pieces in the bag because you took them away. Now, what's this all about? Boxes on forklift pallets. Well, 10 years ago at CSU, we had a giant flood. And it flooded the basements in 13, 14 of our buildings. We had 3 feet of water roll across campus. And I was very upset about books getting wrecked. You see, and this, the internet wasn't that big at this time. And what they're doing is they're rescuing the wet books. But the idea of books being destroyed really upset me because knowledge was being destroyed. And I got to thinking about this. Why was I so upset about the library being trashed? I mean, that was... When I was at the animal science meetings, I got the USA Today shoved under the door of my hotel room, and on the front page of USA Today was wrecked books at my university. And I got to thinking about this, and I think, I am what I do. Yes, I've got emotions. And when kids tease me, it hurt a lot. But my emotions are simpler. I can be happy, I can be sad, they're more in the present. I can go back to times when I was in an emergency landing in a plane and even joke about it. I can tell you it wasn't a joke at the time. We went down those emergency slides, and let me tell you, scary, scary, scary. They thought the plane was going to, they thought it had a bomb in it. I was like when I was a senior in high school when that happened. But I can play that like video back in my head, and it doesn't bother me. But at the time, it was very scary. I mean, it was totally, totally white knuckles. Emergency landing of a plane. They thought they had 10 minutes to get it down. And what I've done is I've replaced emotional complexity with intellectual complexity. This is one of the reasons why I put so much emphasis on careers, because I get social interaction through shared interests. We've got to build on the interests. You look at people with high-functioning autism or Asperger's, that have made a good adjustment. They were taught formal instruction and almost apprenticed into a career. Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, taught me how to look things up in scientific journals. I mean, real scientific journals, not the Encyclopedia Britannica, or today or the Wikipedia. You've got to get past that and get to the real things. How do you get off the wild internet and get into the National Library of Medicine? Today he would have showed me things like PubMed, P-U-B-M-E-D. You type those magic little letters into Google, and you're into the National Library of Medicine. You're off the internet, and you're off what I'm going to call the wild net, and you're into the National Library of Medicine, and you can get summaries of scientific articles for free. I mean, that's absolutely wonderful. I mean, he would have taught me about that. I saw somebody that was my age that's a very successful video photographer. Well, he got some formal instruction in photography from a next-door neighbor. Somebody has to, teach them. Talent has to be developed. Skills have to be developed. Now, the thing is, Nancy did another brain scan on me, and she showed me pictures of people and pictures of things. Well, actually, it was an old Pink Floyd video I think she used. Well, I didn't recognize it as that. I was trying to figure out where she got all the weird cars and stuff from. And so I was looking at the things more, because I was trying to figure out what year it was from looking at the cars. So I was paying more attention to the things. But the thing is, if you didn't have people in this world interested in things, you wouldn't have any electricity in this building. Tesla, who invented the power plant, would definitely be labeled autistic today, not Asperger's today, autistic. And Einstein would have been labeled autistic today, no speech until age 3. And you open up any business magazine, there's all kinds of Asperger's profiled all over it that are not diagnosed. That's what keeps Silicon Valley going. And I'm saying that with all seriousness. We need to have people that are interested in things. Who do you think made the first stone spear? It wasn't the social people yakking around the campfire. That's for sure. Details. Right here, you got little letters and you got big letters. And the person on the spectrum will pick out the little letters quicker because they tend to look for the details. Social interactions is shared interests. I just cannot emphasize that enough. We've got to get these kids that are getting teased into things like computer club, robotics club, journalism club, music, art, all this, chess club, if they like history, a history club, all the things where they can do shared interests. Because when I was in high school, the only refuges I had away from teasing were horseback riding, the science lab. The kids that were interested in those things were not the kids doing the teasing. They were refuges away from teasing. Some of these kids, there's some of these really smart kids that need to go from childhood to grown-uphood, skip high school, and maybe just go right straight to community college. I'm saying it's absolutely serious. I'm running into quite a few of these. But they better learn some manners. There's a rule at the community college. You don't interrupt classes, and there's a rule here at this university. In an hour lecture, you're allowed one question, and you can't be talking back and forth to the teacher. That's the rule. I followed that rule. And then for most classes, unless it's a small discussion class, like 15 students or less, that's a pretty darn good rule to follow. Another thing with these kids, they'll have uneven skills. I've seen a 4th grader that has to have special ed in English, needs to be in high school math. If you make him do baby math, he's going to just misbehave. Or maybe he'll need special ed in math and needs to be, reading college textbooks, in reading. Then let him do it. Keep building on that skill. I look into ones that are successful. These are the things that have been done. Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. Have you ever wondered how Google actually works? Do you know that when you use Google, you actually aren't even on the wild internet? You're actually in a gigantic server farm. Because Google has a program that goes out and collects all the information off all the web pages around the world, stores it in these big warehouses full of millions of computers. And they're called server farms. Well, if you really like computers, you're going to think this is just, computer heaven. But we got to get kids exposed to interesting things. One of my big concerns, if you're in this area of California, you're exposed to all the techie stuff. And there's a lot of Asperger's that go right into Silicon Valley. They do just great. They're never diagnosed. But you get out in the Midwest, a lot of people working in education, they don't know anything about anything technical. It's a big world out there. How do you get into interesting places like that? No, it's all who you know. You got to work on finding the back door. We'll show you. And, business magazines write them up and they say server farms are ugly. Well, when I was in high school, I went to boarding school. My roommate just swooned over the Beatles. I remember when the Beatles came on this Ed Sullivan show, Carol sees Ringo up there, and she just goes, oh, Ringo. Well, I have a friend who's really into computers, and we got to talking about server farms. Man, it was like romance. And she's going, oh, server farms. Oh. Nirvana, computer nirvana. Well, we need to have people like that, or you wouldn't even have any internet. You like to use Google and stuff like that, but you've got to have people on the spectrum, to make something like Google. Oh, I'm serious. Autism is a continuum, going from, when does geek and nerd become Asperger's? You know what? Well, my own Asperger, geek and nerd is exactly the same thing. And then you get down the nonverbal. So you're going all the way from very severe all the way up to brilliant scientists, musicians, journalists, all kinds of different things. Well, they didn't let the business magazines get, in there and photograph much because they don't really like to have the normal people in there. But the one thing they didn't let them photograph was, look at all these electric panels. Man, these server farms take a lot of power. So the next thing that has to be figured out is how to get rid of all those electric boards and, make them more energy friendly. Some Asperger's going to have to figure that out. Some of the best social interaction I ever had was working on construction. I loved working with the construction guys. We could just spend hours talking about how to build stuff. Also, I was a good member of the little boys club, because I got emotions, but, construction workers sort of really get into the 10-year-old mode. And we'd get to talking about things like, and astronauts, too, can get into that. I read this book called To Ride a Rocket. One of the astronauts, it was like the NASA unofficial version of the space shuttle and the space station. And it talked all about, all the awe of outer space and, all the kind of, wonderful things. But it just wouldn't be a complete book without 25 pages of shuttle toilet malfunctions. And yes, I read them. We won't go into it any more than that. But it was like one side so intellectually complex, but then, they had to get into the little boys club stuff too. Now the thing is, when I was a little kid, I was brought up with very clear values about right and wrong. I didn't see sports people behaving badly like you do today, like this horrible Michael Vick thing, sports people cheating and things like that. Movies and things when I was a little kid had very clear-cut values. My favorite TV shows, Superman and The Lone Ranger, those very clear values about being a good person and a bad person. It was all very, very clear. How about religion? I think one of the most important things to teach people on the spectrum is being a good person. The golden rule taught very concretely with examples. Now, when I was a little kid, I stole a toy fire engine from another kid's birthday party, and Mother made me give it back. And she said, well, you wouldn't like it if Billy stole one of your toys. You see, and then I understood why I shouldn't have taken that toy fire engine. I think OT, the pressure things, the swinging things, balancing on the ball, is part of a good program. It can help stabilize some of this bad sensory processing, help to calm things down. Another thing that's, I think, essential is exercise. The research on the benefits of exercise on the brain for everybody is absolutely clear. There was a gigantic review article in Trends in Neuroscience just last month on the brain benefits of exercise. And there also were some papers in there on exercise reducing self-stimming behavior. And those are referenced in Thinking in Pictures. This is my squeezing machine. When I got into puberty, I started having absolutely horrendous panic attacks. It was like a constant state of fear all the time because there's a malfunction in my nervous system. It was sort of like, ooh, wow, looking for predators, all the time. The fear system is turned on all the time. It was terrible. And I found that pressure helped calm me down. Some people are going to have this problem, others don't. It's now controlled with antidepressant medication. I was one of the ones that was saved by antidepressant medication. You get the whole medication thing. Some people need it, some people don't. There's way too many medications just given out like candy. Thinking in Pictures has been updated, 2006, and I updated the whole medical section in it. But the pressure, deep pressure, is calming. Exercise is calming. Slow swinging can be calming. Balancing on a ball, balancing activities can also help stabilize the nervous system. I think it's very important to desensitize these little kids